Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us at Reflecting on Reproductive Justice for our final conversation of 2 days. It is wonderful to see folks returning as well as all the new faces in the room. I am Professor Zakiya Luna.
And I am Professor Seanna Leath. So we are the faculty co-conveners of the Reproductive Justice, Health, and Rights Roundtable at Washington University in St. Louis.
All right. Oh, thank you. We've had so many generative conversations these 2 days with people coming from all over the state to hear from wonderful, local organizations and invited speakers. We are here for our final conversation of the symposium with Professor Loretta Ross. And before we go too much further, we want to make sure to thank the sponsors of the working group, which has various activities, including this symposium. So that is the Provost Here and Next Funds, the Center for the Humanities, the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, as well as we've gotten additional support for the symposium from the Department of Women and Gender Studies and the Law School.
So Ross's bio could take the entire time that we have today, so we'll highlight just a couple of things for those of you who are less familiar with her work. Professor Loretta Ross is an activist, a public intellectual, a scholar, and a 2022 recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Genius Award.
Among many, many, many other things.
So we'll start with just a few opening questions. Okay, so what initially brought you to reproductive justice?
Well, it was a fairly tortuous journey. It wasn't like I woke up one day and said, oh, I want to work on reproductive justice. No, that's not quite how it happened. I've always been a STEM girl, so I majored in chemistry and physics when I went to college. And I have to tell you, if you're not planning on using that shit, you shouldn't take it. But I got pregnant in high school through incest, so I ended up keeping that baby. Reproductive oppression, along with the lack of affordability or accessibility of abortion in 1968. So I went to college, Howard University. Yeah, good old Howard U. Like I said, majoring in chemistry and physics. Trying not to get pregnant again, I accepted implantation of the Dowcon Shield, which for those of you who don't know is a defective intrauterine device that sterilized hundreds of thousands of women across the world. Of course, it affected me. So by the time I was 23, I was sterilized. And so it seemed to be that my plumbing kept getting in front of my plans. Because I wasn't planning on being a feminist, I was planning on being a chemist. And yet, all this stuff kept happening to me, and I think the sterilization was the final straw. Because you shouldn't be told at 23 that you can't have any more babies. At 25, you're gonna start menopause. I mean, it just pissed me off. And so that's when I started paying attention to the sexual, the childhood sexual abuse coupled with the reproductive oppression. And so my first job in the movement was as director of the DC Rape Crisis Center. And that's where I learned the words to attach to what happened to me. And I learned that it wasn't my fault. And then I got a job in the women's movement working at NOW, and that's when I started working on abortion and sterilization abuse and all of those kinds of things. And it was about that time I realized that I had wasted my time in calculus. I really, and organic chemistry, my God. And so I became a professional feminist after that. So that's what started my reproductive justice career.
A professional feminist. One, thank you for sharing those moments, right? Can you, and you already actually have, but can you reflect on any other pivotal moments, maybe after you became a professional feminist, where you fundamentally, it shifted how you were thinking about, approaching, or advocating on a particular topic or issue? I think you raise important points about we might think we have one journey in front of us, and then life happens or things happen, and we realize, like, we're changing course in important ways.
Well, what was interesting about the DC Rape Crisis Center, which was the first one in the country, a group of white women had decided to establish a hotline for rape victims. But they also decided that once they got some funding, they wanted to hire women from the community. And so that meant black women. And so the first 5 or 6 executive directors of the center were black. And of course, being black women, we brought all our issues to the center. So we worked against apartheid, we worked against gentrification, we worked against the belief that prisons were the solution to rape. I mean, we worked on all of those, what we would now call intersectional issues, even though that term had not been created in the 1970s. And so all of that meant that whenever we worked on any one issue, it's just like when you treat a patient, she brings her whole family's issues in. Well, when you treat one issue, you bring the whole universe of things in to that conversation. And so that really did affect how we did our activism, even in the early days. And this was when I was in my 20s, and now I'm in my 70s, so. But let me also add one other thing, because this is so important. When I was 16, because I went to college at 16, so I was always a little stupid, but when I got to Howard University and I became a political activist in the way the students were in that time, I'm really lucky that the older black women who had been feminists before I even knew what the word was didn't give up on insufferable me. Because I was young, and like most young people, we think we know everything. We got names for them. Back then, we used to call them handkerchief heads, but, fried, lied, and laid to the side, and we're growing afros and dreadlocks. I mean, and so we used to be very disrespectful to the women who came before us, and yet they didn't give up on us. And so I want to just point out how special that was in the Washington, D.C. community. I mean, Dorothy Height, who knew Mary McLeod Bethune, who knew Ruth Sykes, the fact that you could actually see the lineage and whose shoulders you're standing upon, or made a profound impact on me when I was even a teenager.
I was gonna ask a side question, but I'm gonna about how.
No, go on.
Okay. So now that you talked about going from your 20s to being 71. So how do you respond to, how do you interact with maybe some of the youngins coming in who might have new terms and might think they know everything and might be a little bit disrespectful in their approach?
I think it's their human right to be young and stupid. I ain't gonna fight it. Yeah, because that would be like I was a young and stupid once. I mean, really? So it really doesn't bother me at all. It is age-appropriate kind of stuff. What I really do like, though, is the energy and the passion and the fact that they don't take no for an answer and everything is possible with them. I mean, I teach because I love young people. I retired in 2012, okay?
It's 2024.
I know, I retired in
You
2012,
retired?
just when I had arranged for all of my bills to fit under my Social Security check. I retired. And so here I am teaching because I love it. I love being around young people and seeing the energy, and I don't really try to put a curb on that enthusiasm. The thing that's hardest for me, though, is because I'm not only a grandmother, I'm a great-grandmother, so I see like multiple generations. And I have to very much call myself in when I want to come off like a scold. And I'm like, wait a moment, no, that is not appropriate. That is not the way to have a conversation with an emerging adult kind of thing. But at the same time, I tell them quite frankly, You know, I can teach you about the truth or I can protect you from the truth, but I can't do both of those at the same time. So I choose to teach you about the truth, and it's your job to figure out how to handle it.
I love that. You are speaking to a mother of four, and I'm like, yes, ma'am. Okay, I didn't even know I was going to learn that today. So last thing I'll ask for right now is you're joining us a couple of weeks after the annual SisterSong conference in Washington, D.C. Right? You were the longtime national coordinator of SisterSong, and for those of us who couldn't attend or don't know about the conference, the special conference, what is special about SisterSong and what it does for the reproductive justice movement?
Well, let me talk about the conference. The conference name is called Let's Talk About Sex. Let's talk about sex, baby. But it came about because the younger women in SisterSong, from age 13 on up, back in the late 1990s, complained that there was no place where they could safely talk about sex and sexuality. And they said, we already know what the abstinence people are trying to get us to do, which is just say no, and that ain't working. But even the pro-choice movement, as they said, would just say, well, you're supposed to say no to sex, but if you do it safely. So they actually said there is no place to have a sex-positive conversation for young people. And so when they told me that when I was the national coordinator, this light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, well, we can do that, because that was the conversation I should have had when I was 14 to keep me from being incested. Because there's this false belief that if you keep children ignorant of race and gender and class, then they're gonna get through childhood safely, and that's absolutely not true. And so we had our first Let's Talk About Sex conference. And so that's become like our signature event every couple of years. Our first tagline was, we're the pro-sex space for the pro-choice movement, which we got abandoned that one because then we started promoting reproductive justice instead of our pro-choice language and stuff. But it continues to be that place where not only young people can come, but they can bring their mother or their aunt or their uncle or whatever significant person is in their life, where they can have safe and healthy conversations about what's going on in their lives. And so people love our Let's Talk About Sex conference. And now, I retired in 2012 from SisterSong, so it is definitely taking on a real raunchy kind of, that maybe I wouldn't have been so happy about, you know. I mean, they had somebody I don't even recognize named Lil Kim. I don't know who that is, you know. And they had somebody, the last one, do you remember?
I do.
Those people,
yes.
what was that?
Folks from the Star Show, P-Valley.
P-Valley. They had the P-Valley there. I'm like, who the
That's
fuck
it.
is P-Valley? I mean, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And I mean, all joking aside, you know, it's where people learn about cervical self-exam. They learn about AIDS. They learn about all the things that are necessary to live a healthy sexual life. And so it's really a cool thing. We give out what we call mother-daughter scholarships. So if the mother is enrolled, they can bring the daughter for free. If the daughter's enrolled, they can bring the auntie for free, so that we can encourage people to have these conversations within their families, where they should be happening anyway and stuff. So yeah, we're kind of proud of it. Let's talk about, now my dream would be to have salt and pepper there. But that's just me, because I am old school, okay? Most of the young people may not even know who salt and pepper is nowadays. But that's my dream.
SisterSong Conference is a very special space.
Apply, y'all. The next time they do, they give out scholarships, because that was the other thing. We give out half our budgets to scholarships so that people can get there. Because they don't need to throw in this big party if people can't afford to come. And so join SisterSong, $5 a month. You'll be eligible for scholarships.
You said you were retired, but you were still doing work for SisterSong.
Well, if they had dealt me another life, I probably wouldn't be doing this work. But I had to, as they say, play the hand that was dealt you. I mean, I really did imagine that my name would be Ross in a chemical lab somewhere. That's how I figured out my life. The plumbing had other plans.
So, and just for a little bit of context for folks, so I think I met you in 2006 or 7.
Okay.
When I first started doing my dissertation research years ago around reproductive justice movement and the innovations of SisterSong regarding really engaging around human rights. Which was something, we're 30 years into the phrase reproductive justice, being developed, and I'm curious what you think folks are missing from contemporary conversations about rights to have children, rights to not have children, and rights to parent in safe and sustainable environments.
Well, we created the original 3 tenets that you just named in 1994, and a decade after that, in 2004, SisterSong's QPOC, Queer People of Color Caucus, said that the first 3 tenets, the right to have children, not to have them, and the right to raise them, were too womb-centric. And so they wanted to add the human right to gender identity, to sexual pleasure, to bodily autonomy. So that became the 4th tenet. So that's what was missing from the original framework. But now I begin to think that in many ways, we are too present-focused. And so all of my more recent work has been around a concept that I'm calling reproductive justice futurism, that's looking at reproductive and genetic technologies through a reproductive justice lens. Because we've got scientists allied with some very immoral billionaires who are creating this whole concept, of long-termism and effective altruism. I mean, these are all concepts we should know because they are trying to sculpt the future of the human race. And they're doing it without our monitoring, without our oversight, without engaging the most vulnerable people in that conversation. I mean, when's the last time you've seen an ad for a designer baby that was black? I mean, really. So we need to have that conversation. So my current passion is marrying Afrofuturism to reproductive justice.
But even when you're mentioning the designer baby piece, it also brings up, for me at least, the importance of knowing history and thinking about eugenics and the notion of who was fit children and designer white children in particular. And so it's interesting as you're thinking about the future, how it does map onto the past in some ways.
For those who are curious and want to hear a little bit more about sort of your thinking around these concepts. You talked a little bit at SisterSong, but I think that folks would be really intrigued to hear more about you're talking about sort of effective altruism. What does that even mean?
Okay.
Right? And what is that, why does that concern you, for example?
There's a movement of what I can only call arrogant white people. Okay, and not all white people are like this, but this is a sect I'm talking about, who are convinced that it is illogical and immoral to pay attention to today's problems. And so as altruists, as people who want to make a difference or have an impact on society, they are long-termists. They want to talk about, well, what will the human race look like 50, 100, 200 years from now? So they call their thinking effective altruism, the meaning that it is ineffective to try to address today's problems. It is more effective to try to address the problems 100 years from now. Now, not only is it an upgrading of old-fashioned eugenics, I mean, there's nothing original about eugenics at all, but they literally, and we're talking about people like Elon Musk and stuff, so these are recognizable names. These are not, just kooks. Well, he is kooky, but you know what I'm talking about. But what they're basically saying is that it doesn't matter how much destruction we do to the present earth, because 100 years from now, we're going to be colonizing Mars, right? And the right genes will be doing that colonizing, and that's why I've got 12 children, and I'm going to have more. And so it's a whole way of thinking that is racist, sexist, nihilistic. I mean, there's so many words I can put to that. And that's a kind of thinking that we need to challenge, but we need to challenge by, first of all, learning about them, because we don't even know that these conversations are taking place. We don't know about the billions of dollars that they're investing in these biosciences that seem to produce what they want to produce. And of course, we already know that they're trying to modify the human genome, claiming that they want to get rid of inheritable diseases. But who made you God to sit up here and say the rest of the human race is going to look like we think it should look, kind of thing. And of course, I think most of us in this room are familiar with Henrietta Lacks and the way that they took her DNA and used it to develop all kinds of cancer treatments and stuff like that. They're doing it to indigenous people around the world, patenting their DNA and all of this stuff. And so we're so preoccupied with this artificial debate over abortion, because it really is artificial, in my opinion. I don't care what men say. I don't care what churches say. I don't care what governments say. Women have been controlling their bodies for a long, long time, whether it's legal or not. And so I call it just a preoccupation of men who couldn't even find a cootie with a flashlight. But, you know, I mean, look at those of us who are heterosexual know how ignorant our partners actually are, okay? So, I mean, I kind of consider abortion kind of like one of those, they want to weaponize it to control for power. But the real power is in our ability to give life. And there's a lot of jealousy about that. So there's a whole nother conversation about that. And so we who brought life to the world are responsible for the continuation of that life in the world. And so that's why I'm really kind of obsessed with reproductive justice futurism. Because if we leave it to these boys, life is going to terminate because they don't know what they're doing. Was I supposed to keep it clean? I didn't know.
No, and I should. I have told my co-conveners and folks, like, I have heard Loretta speak in many spaces, many times, and read work, and every single time there's something to learn. There's something new that kind of can blow your mind, and so I was just in real time processing.
I think it's because I have a science background that I'm following the scientific journals and stuff like that. Because even though I never did get a career in chemistry, I still have that linear brain. And I'm like, what are people doing with this technology? I'm fascinated by that. But, you know, on the other hand, I'm real weak with woo-woo. I don't do woo-woo at all very well. My girlfriend gave me some crystals to keep in my purse, and I'm pissed at her because they're so damn heavy. But I keep those crystals just in case.
There you go. So this, brings up the question, you've been involved in movements for decades. Like, how have you kept engaged in the work, and how have you built community?
Well, first of all, I come from privilege, and I'm not talking about financial privilege, because my mama was a domestic worker, and my daddy, dropped out of high school to join the Army and stayed in it for 26 years. But I come from family privilege. And by that I mean that my family were slaves on a peanut plantation outside of Selma, Alabama. till the end of the Civil War, and then they caught a boat across the Gulf of Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico, I'm sorry, the Gulf of Mexico, to land in Nacogdoches, Texas, and we've been in Texas ever since, my family. And so it's unusual for a black family to know their roots back to 1844. And I know mine. And so that sense of groundedness, that sense of place, that sense of knowing that no matter what happens in my life, I've got a home to go to. My great-grandmother, Big Mama, left her property to everybody in the family, so it can't never be sold. So we've got a built-in senior citizen retreat center right on our family's land and stuff. So that's what I call privilege, family privilege. And so that's what I would first locate, myself in, is knowing those. And that's despite the fact that I don't even like most of my family, to be honest. Well, we've got the left wing and the right wings and the conservatives and the black Trumpers and all of that also all up in the family. But, we get along at the family reunions most of the time. I'm sorry, what was your question? Because I got to think about my family.
Started thinking about family and just went all the way.
Yeah, well.
But what sustains me? So
Sort of building community.
So, one thing that has been a problem in my family is unaddressed childhood sexual abuse, which is multi-generational as well. My mother suffered it, I suffered it. Turns out some of my nieces suffered it at the hands of my beloved brother. I mean, it's just, so while I don't want to paint it as idyllic, this is also the reality of having to figure out how to love somebody who does that, and still deal with family currents and all of that stuff. So that's also part of my sustainable strategy that, strangely enough, the more that I speak up and unearth this stuff, the more the women who are older than me and the ones that are younger than me feel bold enough to speak out about it. And we can actually start strategizing on interrupting it and stopping it and showing our men that we can love you, but you have to stop this kind of stuff. We can't let you continue to get away with this kind of stuff in the family and stuff. Aisha Simmons wrote that book called Love with Accountability, which is one of where I talked about that kind of stuff. But the other thing that sustains me, to be honest, is that I talked about my mentors that helped me out when I was young, and I've had them all along the path. But one of the guys who taught me how to do anti-fascist work, to fight anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and white supremacy and all of that. Oh, I love Leonard Zeskin. He's also a MacArthur awardee. Anyway, we were coming back from Blakely, Georgia one day. And Blakely is in the south part of Georgia. And the reason we were coming back from there was that a 5-year-old black child had perished in a fire where the fire department was only 2 blocks from his house. And we were asked to go down there to investigate what had happened, and it turns out that the Ku Klux Klan ran the fire department and called the fires in black homes neighborhood beautification. And we felt powerless to do anything about it, because, and that's why the black community had called us to come in and say, this is not right. We're losing black homes from a fire department that won't come put out fires in the black community. What can we do? And so we were driving back to Atlanta, and I was so depressed about that, and I was just out and out angry. And Leonard Zeskin told me, he said, Loretta, you need to lighten up. I'm like, what you talking about, white boy? He said, keep perspective. He said, fighting Nazis should be fun. He said, it's being a Nazi that sucks. And he made me laugh, but he gave me perspective that I needed to figure out a way to have joy and love in fighting the right fight and not get into the despair that my enemies want me to be in all the time. And because they're in these pits of despair kind of thing. And it took me a while. I mean, it took me a while to really figure out how important that message was. But I basically come to realize that if you're not having fun fighting for human rights, you're doing something wrong. Because Tony Cade wrote, you know, we got to make the revolution irresistible. Ain't nobody want to come join a movement where you make them feel worse about themselves than before they came. Hell, they don't need no help in feeling miserable. They do that quite well on their own. So when they come to the movement, they should feel joy and growth and fulfillment, even as they look at the ugliest things people do to each other. As a matter of fact, hope is not an option. It's vital to do the work. Okay, I'll write it down one day.
So Zakiya mentioned that during the SisterSong conference, you were thinking about another human right, the right to joy, which you are now talking about, right? And you're even hearkening to some of Adrienne Maree Brown's work around the importance of pleasure activism, so for activism to feel like pleasure, right, to bring more folks in. Can you say more about how you're thinking about joy, how you see it as related to reproductive justice, and how you're cultivating it for yourself?
Well, I just talked to Adrienne a couple of weeks ago. She's got a new book out, and so I went to her book signing, and she's amazing. She's truly amazing. I quote her so much, it's just, and that's what I'm talking about, how younger people keep you energized. I mean, Adrienne has to be at least 40 years younger than me, and I learn from her every time she opens her mouth and stuff. But anyway, when Adrienne created the concept of pleasure activism, I think it pulled it from the precipice of believing that self-care gets confused with self-indulgence. You know, it's about caring more about what's going on in your head and your heart than what's going on in your hair and whether or not you're in a nice spa. You know, and I think people kind of confuse self-care with self-indulgence. You know, they're not working, one concept that people talk about a lot is emotional intelligence, but I'm trying to promote the concept of integrity intelligence. How do you walk through the world constantly reinforcing your highest integrity? You know, so that it becomes your default as opposed to something you have to work at. For example, if you're in a supermarket and the cashier gives you too much money, it's your integrity intelligence that gives it back, as opposed to taking advantage of the fact that someone else made a mistake that could benefit you and stuff. And we don't teach that stuff. You know, when we talk about a moral education, people think we're talking about the Bible. We're saying, no, we're talking about how you choose to grow into your best self every day. You know, that's the work we need in the human rights movement. And you can't respect and protect other people's human rights when you don't respect and protect your own. And that's really important. I know I sound like I'm trying to preach, but I'm not. I'm just trying to say how I see it. I like thinking of working on myself every day so that I'm a better Loretta. Because for too long, I've let trauma be in the driver's seat. And now I'm learning that it ain't driving me anywhere I really want to go and stuff. And that, maybe that's segues into talking about my book. So, but do you have any more questions before I do the commercial?
Commercial away. Do not want to stop you.
We will get back to questions. Do the commercial. Yeah.
Well, let's do the commercial.
Yeah.
In your seats or somewhere, someone's passing out cards. It's for my 4th book called Calling In, how to make change with those you'd rather cancel. And I swear there's a whole bunch of people I want to cancel, so. the way it came about was that about 10 years ago, my grandson decided that he didn't know how to answer the phone when grandma called. You know, let's let it ring and go to voicemail. So when I finally got hold of him, I jacked his ass up and said, listen, you're my only heir. You want me to give away all my property to homeless women or something? You would want to put a ringtone on that phone for grandma, right? And he did. But he also said, well, grandma, you know, if you want to reach me, get on Facebook. You can find me there. Y'all know what happened. I got on Facebook, he got off of it saying it was for old folks. And he's right, because I'm still on Facebook with a lot of old folks. Ain't a young person to be found. I mean, isn't that true? I know, it's an old folks thing, right? They're on TikTok and shit. But anyway, once I got on Facebook, I noticed how mean people were to each other. I became convinced that people were saying things to each other anonymously on social media that they didn't have the courage to say to people's faces. And so I asked another young person I was working with on reproductive justice, as a matter of fact. We were organizing a reproductive justice program at Smith. What was going on? And Marissa said, oh, you mean the call-out culture? I said, y'all named it? She said, yeah. And I said, well, what are y'all doing about it? And she shrugged and walked away like it was inevitable. And that answer didn't sit well with me, because by that time I'd been doing, activism for 45 years, and I was a rape survivor that taught black feminist theory to rapists. I was a black woman who'd been shot at in Mississippi that taught, that deprogrammed white supremacists. Basically, I've had a whole lot of conversations with a whole lot of people I don't like, but we figured out a way to have conversations together. And so that's when I thought that I created the concept of calling in. I said, instead of calling people out, why don't we call them in and try to pass on the techniques I had for having challenging conversations. So I started writing on a book on it in 2016, and then my son died, my only child. The baby I'd had as a teenager, he died. And so then I just couldn't touch it for a number of years because I was dealing with that. And then, just shorten the story, Loretta. COVID happened. I got sent home by Smith College like everybody else did, and I decided to take online what I was teaching at Smith. I said, I'm bored. I want to teach, right? So I'm going to teach it. And I started teaching my white supremacy course, which had a calling in component in it, for $5. I still do. These classes are still online, and they're still only $5. So if you ever want to take one of them, go to my website. It's my name. Anyway, I started teaching the $5 courses on white supremacy and calling in. And then the New York Times, somebody at the New York Times got a word that I was doing that. And next thing I knew, I was hearing from a publisher, from an agent. I had $1 million contract, and I wrote this book. That's what $5 got me, $1 million. Okay? I mean, proving again, if you just serve your people, all your dreams will come true. Because I've heard a lot of people, oh, you just giving it away. You ain't charging enough. I said, I'm good. I'm good with the $5. And guess what it got me? And so anyway, a lot of people are complaining about the call-out culture, and I decided to write a book about what you do about it. And so that's what I did. But I have to honestly say that I did not create the concept of calling in. I was actually pissed because I thought I was original, and then in my research I found that this young trans man named Lone Tran had actually created the concept because when they were 18 years old. I was like, damn, I thought I had created this. But no, obviously because Lone was immersed in the call-out culture, it would take a young person to say, why don't we call each other in? And so I was able to hire Lone to serve as my trainer for a couple of years in honor of the fact that they had, I always get the gender wrong, they had created it before me, and yet my job is to build movement using it, bring people into the human rights movement by calling them in instead of calling them out. And that's the card. The pre-order, that's the pre-order card that you've been passed out, is coming out February 4th for Black History Month. And I know Simon & Schuster's going to want to earn all that money they pay me back, so keep your eye for a book tour or something. As a matter of fact, if you wrote Simon & Schuster saying, we want Loretta Ross to come, they'd probably be happy to send me, because they got to earn all that money back.
We are soon to open up for audience questions, so prep your questions, the thoughts that have been percolating for you for a little bit. But I do want to ask one more thing, if I can. So family has been running throughout the conversation, right? You've been tying it back to experiences in your family, with your son, your own experiences relating to your plumbing. I really want to ask, with your son, you said, sometimes we think we can avoid conversations around race, gender, class with our kids, and that'll protect them. How do you think, or how did you try to break generational curses that were happening in your family? Like, what conversations were important to you with your son for you to have with him as his mom?
Well, first of all, as loving and supportive as my parents were, we didn't have any conversations around race, class, or gender. I mean, the first time someone called me the N-word, I didn't know what it was. I was 8 years old. Huh? Right. I was 8 years old, and my best friend Debbie, I had taken her doll, and she called me a nigger. And I said, well, you're a nigger too. We went on back to playing, and when I asked Mom and Dad, I said, Mom, what's a nigger? They, who said that to you? I mean, it was like a big drama scene at my house, because they had so carefully kept those conversations away from us. And so I committed with my son to do differently, that I wasn't going to repeat the errors of silence with him, and, just keep him in. And then I was a baby raising a baby, so there wasn't a whole lot of space between our generations and stuff. I mean, I was 14 when I got pregnant, 15 when I had him. Matter of fact, it pissed me off because he wanted to party with my friends. I'm like, no, you're supposed to be another generation. but we were really close. And so, but even then it produces unintended consequences. So when he was 14 years old, here I am, all of 28, 29, I'm in the kitchen cooking, and my son comes up with his two friends and said, Mama, we need to talk to you. Now, anytime your kids preface it with that kind of sentence, you know something deep is about to come off. Because otherwise, they just blurt it out. They don't stop and say, Mama, I need to talk to you, right? And so I said, okay, what about? He said, we need you to go to the drugstore and get us some condoms. And before I could think, I said, what do you need condoms for?
You knew what he needed condoms for.
Yeah. He said, Ma, you know why.
Right.
I said, oh, I'm sorry, wrong question. Why do you think I need to go buy them for you? And this is in the middle of the AIDS crisis, too. My son graduated high school in 1987, so this is the middle of an AIDS crisis. And so I said, why do you think I need to go buy them for you? My son reared back and said, everybody knows you have to be 18 to buy condoms. I don't care how much information I gave that child. It was trumped by the bad information he was getting at school. Because that's how it works, right? And so I told him, no, you do not have to be 18 to go buy condoms. Here's $20. Go get yourself some condoms, right? And by the way, I'm going to keep a big bottle. I kept a punch bowl full of condoms by the front door after that. I think I gave condoms to the whole community, because that punch bowl was emptied every 2 weeks. But I bet you we had the lowest teen pregnancy rate in the community, because I was that parent, that wanted to do things better with my child, because my parents did great, but they were just those lacunas. They didn't know they didn't know how to parent us in the ways they should have been parented. Because it wasn't until I was 35 years old my mother told me that she had been incested. That was 21 years after when I needed to have that information. When I was pregnant through incest myself. And so you have to do things differently to break these multiple generational curses. And for me, doing it in the midst of still loving and being in relationship with the people that do this stuff too. Because I never conceptualized that I could and wanted to estrange myself from my family. I have 5 brothers, a dad. We have more boys than girls in our family, and I never imagined that I wanted to not be in relationship with them, even though we can do some pretty bad stuff. So anyway, and teaching women not to be accomplices to it in my family as well is very important.
That's also a good plug for Love with Accountability because they talk about that in the book as well. Okay, who is Meredith? You are, okay, so we will open it for audience questions, remarks.
Is someone going to Oprah the mic somewhere?
Oh, yes.
We got
right
one.
here.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So thank you for this great conversation. I want to go back to the future reproduction justice a little bit. I want to touch a little bit about surrogate mom. So when we talk about future reproductive justice, for those people who have like infertility or LGBTQ family, I do agree for the surrogate mom, but like for the rich people who who employ some
Commercial surrogacy.
Yeah, that's what I want to say, but I try to find a more right word for that. So I want to ask, so for the surrogacy and the reproductive justice for surrogacy, surrogate rich mom, I want to ask, what's your opinion about this more commercial way? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I would recommend that you read a book by Grace Kao, Kao, because she became a voluntary surrogate out of very altruistic motives, and she's done an excellent analysis of both voluntary and commercial surrogacy through a reproductive justice lens. Grace Kao is CAO, as I said. She's on the planning committee with me to do this thing around reproductive justice futurism. One of the things that we have to have more conversations about is if everyone has a human right to have a child, well, what does that human right entail? Does it give us permission to exploit vulnerable people simply because we can't have children in the way that are seen as routine and normal and natural and stuff? Does that give you the right to take advantage of people's desperate situations? But at the same time, particularly when you're looking at surrogacy tourism, women in many countries can earn through a surrogacy contract 10 years worth of salary that they wouldn't be getting otherwise. And so that allows them to uplift their families and do all of that. And so it's a desperate conversation we need to have. But I do have problems with people taking advantage of other people's desperate situations. That doesn't sound moral to me. And another conversation that I just think we need to have in the feminist community as a whole: what makes your damn DNA so special? I mean, there are hundreds and thousands and millions of children who need parents to love them. So why you got to have your child in order to express your need as a parent when there's so many other ways to do it? And I don't think we talk enough about the patriarchal bargain of worshiping your own DNA that way. And we need to have that conversation. Oh, you asked me to give them something new.
Oh, yes, we did.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for coming. Just everything that you shared. It's like, I'm gonna need a lot of time to chew on it. Very briefly, my name is Nicole Dain. I am a recent graduate of the University of California, San Francisco. I was in their certified nurse midwifery and women's health nurse practitioner dual degree program. I feel a closeness to you. As an undergrad, I did biomedical engineering and women's studies. So
Right.
so very kindred.
You did what I wanted to do. All right.
We all have our path. But very briefly, I have a huge passion for Black maternal health. It speaks to me in a myriad of reasons that we don't have enough time to go into, and that's not what my question is about. A lot of the things that you touched on that I had a question about was about finding your community and keeping the joy in the midst of absolute chaos. I find it difficult as someone who's beginning their role as a nurse midwife. I basically want to serve the city of St. Louis, that is my home and it has my heart. But what I'm kind of running up against is that there is a severe anemia of Black midwives who are catching babies in the inner city. It doesn't exist. And I feel like I know that I'm going to have to do this hard thing of this trailblazing in a space that traditionally, historically, presently, and probably in the future will not support me, people that look like me, etc. So when you've been in situations where you found yourself isolated from your community, how are you able to keep that hope alive? How are you able to find that joy in the midst of isolation when you were doing hard things? I know that that's super, super broad, but any advice would be super, super helpful. Thank you so much.
There's a lot of pathways to it. I can only describe mine. When I was 27, one of my best friends got assassinated for doing political work. Her name was Yolanda Ward in Washington, D.C. And it scared the shit out of us because we were doing totally political work trying to get rent control in D.C. and lobby City Hall and nothing that we thought was radical. I mean, there was a Black Liberation Army, but we weren't them. We weren't the Black Panthers. We were just the tenant organizers trying to deal with housing conditions in D.C. And she got assassinated for doing that work because she wrote a paper called Spatial Deconcentration that talked about the deliberate destruction of Black inner city neighborhoods as a way to destroy Black voting strength. And she talked about the bribes and stuff that were being paid out. And so at 27, I had to make a decision whether I was going to stay in the work or not, because it destroyed her death destroyed the housing movement in Washington, D.C. for almost 20 years. It scared people. Most of the people working with us just melted all back into their lives. They wasn't doing any more organizing, protesting, any of that stuff. And that was legitimate because I should also add, we had 12 break-ins leading to her death of our homes and our offices and stuff. And so once I made that commitment, and I wasn't alone, one of my best friends, Nikenji Toure, who had been in the Black Panthers, also committed with me that we were going to continue to do the work. That was when I became serious about being an organizer. It wasn't just something I did as a dilettante. I only got into tenant organizing because they threatened to evict me from my apartment building. It wasn't like I plotted this path here. Life kept getting in the way. But then I hit rock bottom too, because I was doing it all for the wrong reasons. I became a drug addict. I stole money from an organization. I did everything wrong trying to do the right thing. And so I had to hit rock bottom to realize that I needed another strategy. And frankly, I needed to get some damn therapy because I was using the movement to prevent working on what was going on in my head. I could justify not working on the head because I was doing good for the movement, for the people, you know, that kind of thing. And I really did have to hit rock bottom to figure out, okay, I still got this political commitment, but I've got to do it from a different motive and with a different life than what I've been doing it, the way I've been doing it. And again, I was very lucky to be surrounded by a black sisterhood and some black men who, you know, were willing to invest in me and not give up on me, even though I kept messing up over and over and over again. And I think probably the most profound one that helped me not give in to despair was Reverend C.T. Vivian. Reverend Vivian had been an aide to Dr. Martin Luther King. As a matter of fact, he led one of the first sit-ins in 1947 in Peoria, Illinois, the first desegregation sit-in. And Reverend Vivian started the National Anti-Klan Network, which is where I was working at the time. And my job was to deprogram white supremacists, just like I talked about. But he used to tell me all the time, he said, Loretta, when you ask people to give up hate, then you need to be there for them when they do. And I went, oh, shit. But I couldn't say that to a preacher, you know, so I had to mumble, right? But he was showing me how much hate was still lodged in my heart that I hadn't divested myself of. And, I mean, so I don't know how to say there was a smooth path and it was easy. No, that ain't the truth of what I went through. It was hard. I had to hit rock bottom. I had to be with people who didn't give up on me. I had to make mistakes. And I'm telling you, after you get so visible, your mistakes end up in the damn Washington Post. So, you know, it's dealing with life on your terms is what I learned how to deal with. And then once I found out how perfect the movement was and I could bring my imperfect self to it and then have a lot of fun kicking ass against injustice, life became real good. Real good. Because I didn't have to spend any time hiding the imperfect self that I am. I could just bring all of that to the movement and still do the right thing with some righteous people who themselves are imperfect and stuff. And so I haven't looked back, but it took people giving me space to grow, having patience with me, not letting me give up on myself, because that was always a temptation. See, I had never healed from my childhood trauma. And so, you know, I was carrying all of that stuff too. And so I can't say it's been easy, but it's certainly been worth it. And I find that, and in a way I'm pissed off, because once I decided to make love my motivation instead of hate, then I found out that I couldn't even hate the Ku Klux Klan. And if a black woman can't hate the Klan, who the fuck can you hate? I mean, really, I'm like, oh, damn. Is that what that means? And they were the safest people in the world for me to say I hate. And it didn't even work for me anymore. But I'm glad, you know.
Before we move to the next question, I also want to give a plug for, like, part of the idea of the way this whole symposium has been structured, one around conversations, not just among people on stage, but also people attending and the local organizations, right? Which is why we have folks like Phyllis right up here, who's with the St. Louis Doula Project, why we've had Birth Village here, why we've had different organizations, and so that people who want to make connections can do so, right? Because community is so important. So I hope you will make sure to connect with you. Okay.
But I also want to add,
Yeah.
in terms of serving your community, do not do it because you expect to be thanked. Don't do it because you expect to be recognized. Don't do it because you think you can be their savior. because none of those will be true. You know, the thing that I learned from the civil rights movement is stop imagining that you're the entire chain of freedom. You're just one link, because the chain goes back to your ancestors and forward to your descendants. And so your only job is to make sure that chain doesn't break at your link through apathy, through despair, through hopelessness, through deceit, through whatever. Just don't let that chain break at your link. That's all you got to worry about. And that made me feel, when I heard that let me sigh, because I had, my ego told me that the whole thing depended on me getting it right all the time. And that was so untrue.
Thank you. I also just want to start with gratitude for you and for everyone who's here and for the legacy of the work and being the links and the chains. So I'm so excited to get your book. I'm trying to figure out how I can get that copy right there. Because we've had this conversation for a long time. Part of my lineage around healing justice has been around restorative practices. We know harm will happen. So when it happens, it's the way we organize around it or the way we disorganize around it. I'm really curious a little bit about, in your own legacy, your lineage, and a little foreshadowing of in the book, what type of restorative practices have really been powerful for you, throughout your life?
The first thing I learned about calling in is that the first person I need to call in is myself. Because I'm a call-out queen. I actually, that's the opening line of the book. Because I get so pissed off by so much that I have to swallow my words over and over again till I'm choking on them. But I'm finding that when I let go of those words, they don't achieve what I thought they should achieve. It's messing me up. It ain't even changing the people that I think need to be changed. And so the healing practice that I first embrace is to call myself in first and stop passing judgment on people who have their imperfections just like I have my imperfections. Stop walking around expecting that I'm going to find perfect people to do struggle with. Stop expecting that people can grow without me giving them room to grow. Those are the kinds of things that I've had to learn. And that's why I kind of tell the book not as a self-help book. It actually ain't a self-help book. It's a biography that taught me what I needed to know about calling myself in. And I'm offering it as a lesson to other people. And I've learned that if you're still bleeding from the scars of your life, whether you call somebody in or out, all you're doing is bleeding all over them. And so, you want to call yourself in first. And that means learning self-forgiveness, for example. Learning to be proud of your imperfections instead of being busily trying to hide them. Owning your mistakes with joy and pride instead of being ashamed of them. Sonia Renee Taylor tells us to break up with shame. Shame is never your friend, never has been your friend. Those kinds of things. And then I do a kind of scientific analysis because I talk about a continuum and all the different choices that you can make. Calling in, calling out, canceling, calling on, or calling it off. Those are choices that you have within that. But I really wanted to share what I've been through as a way of learning how to own myself, own my ability. I'll just say one short lesson. I found that if I swallow the first thought, which is born out of my trauma, I can let loose the second thought that is a reflection of my integrity. And I used to think that, oh, you're supposed to follow your first mind. You're supposed to follow your first mind. No, your first mind is speaking from trauma. Pure instinct, pure reflex, pure defense. It's your second mind that you actually want to pay attention to. Because that little chatter going on in your head, it's incessant and it ain't never right. That pisses me off. Why could you shut it up if it ain't gonna ever be right? I mean, but you can't. So that's what the book's about, is how you learn to call yourself in so that you can call. It is very akin to restorative justice, but from what I've learned of restorative justice, it still reminds me of a binary. The victim versus perpetrator. When I write, we're all victimized violators. Usually we've been victimized that turns us into violators. But we live in that mixed state. We're never purely victims or purely violators. We're all mixed up that kind of way. So I try to do a non-binary look at how we actually exist in relationship to each other. Because I learned that men who were in prison raping and murdering black women like me, they had complicated lives too. But when I first met them, I didn't have no problem with them being in jail, and I certainly didn't have no problem with thinking they'd never be out, you know? Or like I said, people in the Klan, boys in the hood. These are people that I had no problem thinking of as disposable. There's a hand in the old, oh, you're next. Okay, go on. We'll get you a microphone.
Thank you so much for being here. And this is related to Atiya's question. I'm thinking about calling in, and I'm thinking about social distance. So the difference between some of the hard conversations you've had with people who are Nazis and people who have these really awful ideas, but who are not related to you, versus the intimate conversations you've had in your family that are oriented towards calling in and restoring a family that you hold dear. I'm curious about, how do you look in the eyes of someone who's visited violence on people that you love and call them in a meaningful way without that just re-traumatizing you?
Well, it was my therapist that taught me how to deal with my family, because I could have never figured that out by myself. It took a pro, okay? When it turned out to be my favorite brother who had incested his daughter, she said, the first thing, now that he knows you know, the first thing you have to assure him is that you still love him. His biggest fear is right now is that he's going to lose the love of his family. And if that's the only thing he's thinking about, he's not going to be able to hear anything else you've got to say. And she was right. And so I made special efforts to assure him, because I didn't learn about it until I was, in my 60s. So this is my favorite brother I had loved for 65 years. You don't just turn that love off because you suddenly learn something new about them and stuff. And so she gave me a step-by-step process to have that conversation with him. And we continue to have it. And then, nothing goes like, a Hollywood play. So the brother who was implicated, I have a good relationship with. The brother who was not implicated but got mad because he thought I was airing the family's dirty laundry, he's the one that doesn't want to talk to me. So it's kind of complicated, right? Because he doesn't want to change his impression of his big brother. So it's kind of weird. And so we're just, the other one I'm talking about, we're just learning how to re-contact and re-engage with each other. Because that brother told me that I was only raising this childhood sexual abuse stuff as a way to build a profitable feminist career for myself. But then he's the brother that's motivated by money. He's our family Donald Trump. So I kind of knew money matters to him a lot, So of course he would think that was my motive. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Dumaine, And I'm an electrical engineer, actually, so I understand the calculus. You know, I have appreciation for somebody who understands calculus.
Differential equations kick my ass.
Yeah. I came to engineering actually from a love of math, so, you know, so that helped.
Go you.
So, and my master's actually is from WashU here in
Go
electrical
you.
engineering. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You like those, what they call that movie? Different Figures? What was the?
Oh, Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures, yeah, go you. Watching you Hidden Figures.
Right. But my question has to do with the activism part of your career, your life. So I know that there's all these systems in place, and you alluded to one that's, just futuristic, and they're still doing these systems, these things like that we're kind of like cogs in a wheel, and we're just, things have been planned out long before, we got here or whatever. But I wanted to know, for the wins that you've had in your past, as far as, maybe you did get the rent controlled or whatever, what had to happen for those things to happen? So, like, did somebody have to die, or did people had to run out of money, or, like, what happened that those wins, because, like, before the call-in, people were very divided. I mean, before somebody, like, became, stopped being a white supremacist, they were a white supremacist, and their systems were working, And so how were some of those things dismantled, these systems dismantled?
Nothing ever happens in isolation, as you know. Every action has a reaction, et cetera, what? We got rent control in 1974 in Washington, D.C., because we finally persuaded Congress to give D.C. home rule so that we could elect our own mayor and city council and start passing the laws that we wanted. And then Reagan came in 1980 and reversed all of that. So that's what happened. I think appreciating that nothing happens in isolation, everything is related. There's always, there's cause and effect, but also you have to recognize that just because you see an effect, you're not actually looking at the right cause and those kinds of things. All the people in the white supremacist movement that I deprogrammed had their epiphanies before they met me. I'm not going to say, some Nazi fell in love with a black woman and I bought them out. That ain't how it happened. Even though HBO wrote a movie saying that, that is not how it happened. They paid me a lot of money and then they got the story wrong. They lied. But anyway, when you deal with white supremacists and their deprogramming, what surprised me the most was as they would tell me the stories of how they got into the hate movement, they would talk about feeling isolated, feeling lonely, feeling bullied, feeling forgotten, feeling insignificant. But all those stories were about their feelings. None of those stories were about hate. They got into the white supremacist movement, and that's where they learned to hate. But we're talking about bullied, skinny white boys from upstate New York that had never met a Jewish person, a Muslim person, or a black person. So they didn't have no framework for hate, but they had a framework for misery. And it was that misery that causes them to join hate groups or become school shooters like we're dealing with now. And so it is so urgent for us to address those feelings of isolations, of being bullied, of feeling insignificant in our young people today. Because that's what leads to those negative, bad ends. And we're not doing those interventions early enough and with the urgency that they deserve, while we're dealing with 385 mass shootings so far this year, one from my state of Georgia just a couple of days ago. I think the science is there to tell us what to do, but the political will to make it happen is not there. And that's what we have to change. I love the way that the Parkland students took on the National Rifle Association and kicked their asses, you know, and broke the myth that you couldn't oppose the NRA and be politically successful in this country. I mean, those 15, 16, and 17-year-old students, that's why I love and believe in young people, because they don't listen to you when they say it can't be done, right? They go for it anyway. And we need more like those Parkland students. We need more people who believe the impossible dream and do it any damn way and stuff. I love them for that reason. So those are some stories that I would say about that. I've heard of people who say that they were able to sway somebody from being in the Klan because they made friends with them or they fell in love with them. I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen. It just didn't happen for me that way. And it was so funny when HBO bought the rights to my story with this white supremacist named Floyd Cochran. It was kind of funny because they wrote it as a love story. And I'm like, you know, I'm sorry, but I'm not in the habit of falling in love with Nazis that are about the size of my thigh. Really? I'm this skinny, chain-smoking white kid, right? No. So anyway, but if you stay in this work long enough, or you stay in this life long enough, you'd be amazed at how funny life can be. And if you look at it with the right eyes and stuff. Was that it? Anybody else? Oh, come on.
Yeah.
One more question here, and then
A closing.
Oh, no, the pressure's on. Uh-oh, you
Your
all
question.
don't get
It's
mad.
gotta be
Okay,
good.
so, I
Okay,
mean,
we got
what
two
you...
more questions.
Oh, good, okay, good. I don't have to fill... Who's the last one? Because then we'll all look at you for the pressure. So, I mean, so many follow-up questions just based on what you said, but I actually have a question about your international work.
Okay.
And I know you've done a ton at the international level, but I'm really curious, one or two lessons that you've learned working from women in the global south or in other places. I do work internationally, and I know one of the things is that America always thinks we have it right and we want to export it. And I know I've read some of what you've learned from, I just love to hear you talk. I think all of us do. But what are some things that you'd like to share with us that you've learned from doing your work, like, for example, the Global Fund for Women or some of the international women's rights organizations?
Well, most of my international work, and I've been to about 30-something countries, has been around addressing U.S. imperialism. Okay, so I'm not a tourist just trying to go see what's, beautiful about Dubrovnik. I mean, I'm there usually addressing the consequences of our government's action internationally. So during the 80s, that took me a lot to Central America, looking at Nicaragua and Guatemala and El Salvador and what was happening there, the Philippines under the Marcos dictatorship, South Africa under apartheid, and on and on and on. And even I was in Yugoslavia the week it broke apart, which is why Dubrovnik comes to mind. And almost to a person, they would say, we don't need you over here as a political tourist. We need you at home getting your country's foot off our neck. And I listened. I did not use the global human rights framework until women from the global south told me how important it was. I think I'd heard the phrase human rights most of my life, but I was just thinking of that tortured prisoner in a jail somewhere. I hadn't thought about how the United States violates people's human rights domestically and internationally, and I learned that from women in the global south. I learned about structural adjustment policies from women in the global south. I learned about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because it wasn't taught in any of our schools. from women in the global South. And so I've domesticated my activism in all of the 21st century, basically. And I don't think that that's what everybody should do, but that's what I've chosen to do, because after 30 countries and so many wars, everybody's saying, go home and change your government. That is your obligation as a U.S. citizen, because we can't change your government. Only American people can. And so that's where I've been putting all of my energy. That's my way of doing global activism now. But that doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. But I've taught, I've worked in HIV/AIDS in South Africa, done service delivery. So, I've done a lot of stuff, particularly when I was more mobile and able to do that. But I think the number one job for U.S. activists is to stop our country from messing over so many other people's countries. Because, we go to war trying to explain how our oil keeps getting under other people's sand. And we'll destroy a whole country. We will let all kinds of massacres and stuff like that happen, like the present one going on right now. And not to mention the Sudan. I mean, we just let the Sudan has oil. Nobody's talking about that, And so there's so much we can do differently. And that's what I call my global solidarity work. But I don't have to be in those countries to understand that I'm doing global solidarity work by staying right here and changing what my country does to them. There was one more hand I saw. Was that it? Oh, you was in the black, the woman in black. You wait for the mic.
You said in a documentary something that I already should have known from your work, but it was one of the abortion documentaries, and on the topic of like dissension within the movement and the reproductive rights and reproductive justice overlapping movements and that difficulty and you said we just have to remember we're all trying to fight the fascists, and I just tell myself that every time there's a dark moment, and I wanted to know if you could speak a little bit more about like how we get together to remember the goal is fighting the fascists, and also now that I hear you talk, like, do I need to think differently about the fascists?
Before I get to your question, I got to do a second commercial. This book is coming out, but I've also got a second book coming out that's primarily written by Marlene Gerber-Fried with me, and it's called Abortion and Reproductive Justice. So it's looking at all abortion politics through a reproductive justice lens. And the University of California Press is printing that next year. So I actually got 2 books coming out. Your question made me remember to say that. We do not do a good job of teaching people about white supremacy and its relationship to fascism. I think that it starts from the fact that we don't separate white supremacy, the ideology, from whiteness as an identity. But the reality is that not all white people are white supremacists, and sadly, not all white supremacists are white. I mean, Clarence Thomas, anybody? Right? And so, because of that conflation that is less than helpful, it makes people afraid to look at and critique squarely head on fascism and white supremacy. Yet fascism was predicated on white supremacy. The people, Mussolini and Hitler, came to America, or sent people to America, to study how we had committed genocide against indigenous people and kidnapped Africans for their enslavement. They patterned fascism off of what we had done. So if anybody's an originator of fascism, the United States needs to own that. And I would maintain that the reasons they don't want us to teach about race and gender and slavery and critical race theory is because they want to repeat that history. And they're afraid that young white people will decide not to believe in white supremacy, which is why they're not only doing voting suppression against brown and black people, they're removing ballots from predominantly white colleges and universities because their young people are not voting the way that they want them to vote. So we have to talk about voting suppression writ large, not just as a race-based type thing, an identity-based type thing. It is an ideology-based thing because they don't like the fact that 50% of young white voters from 18 to 29 voted for Joe Biden in 2020 and not Donald Trump. And that was the first time any slice of the white demographic had not voted for the candidate that best represented white supremacy. That had never happened in the history of America before. But it happened in 2020, and that's why they're so scared, and that's why they're doing all this mess around trying to persuade people that they shouldn't vote, their vote doesn't matter, that the election's rigged, blah, 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 blah. But if your vote didn't matter, why are they spending billions to stop you from doing it? Think about that. So don't self-sabotage yourself out of half-assed theories about why you shouldn't vote, because it does matter. Particularly in a red state like this one. Maybe it might not matter if your ass lived in Massachusetts, but y'all are in fucking Missouri. Have y'all noticed? Every vote in Missouri matters. Okay? So I hope I answered your question. But like I said, all of this is available for $5. Okay. Go to LorettaJRoss.com, sign up for the next class. It's the Walmart of consciousness raising. Thank y'all.
So we wanted to close out with an opportunity, and you can pick or combine. One question is, what is a question you wish people asked you? And a potentially related question is, what is the thing you're excited about looking at the next 30 years?
What is a question I wish people asked me? Unfortunately, nothing serious comes to mind. Because
it doesn't have to be serious.
Okay, well, how do you play pinochle? Because that's what I do. I play competitive pinochle in tournaments, and I've yet to win a damn tournament. So how can I win a pinochle tournament? Tell me how. I don't know. Pinochle is like spades on steroids, for those of y'all that don't know. Or bridge on double steroids. What is the question? I guess the sustainability strategy. How to avoid becoming a movement tourist and burning out in a short period of time? That would be the question I'd want to be asked. And then what was your second question?
Well, do you have an answer for that question?
The answer is easy. Party as hard as you work. Found that works for me. I have a toggle switch to my consciousness. Sometimes it's on and I'm woke, and sometimes it's off and I'm totally politically incorrect. Watching the Cosby Show like nobody business, not apologizing for, watching Twilight without doing a feminist analysis of it, That's my sustainability strategy. I take my partying as hard as seriously as I take my work. And I create balance, and I also very intentionally keep strong, loving relationships with apolitical people in my life. And I didn't realize how thoroughly I had done that. When George Bush invaded Iraq in 2015, I happened to be in Spain, and that February, I mean, God, people were protesting the war, and they had this big plaza in Madrid called Plaza Mayor. They were protesting the war, but they were having so much fun protesting with puppets and people in costumes. It was wonderful how Europeans protest. We're too serious. They have fun when they protest. But anyway, I came home a couple of days later, ready to tell my Pinochle posse about, what I had seen at Plaza Mayor, and before I could get the words out of my mouth, there was my best friend going around selling yellow ribbons to support the soldiers in the war. I'm like, oh, I guess I won't be talking about George Bush here. And having the seamless blending of both sides of my life, that's what gives me joy. That I've got people who politically, they're probably not very close to me, but emotionally, they're very important to me. And then I got the political people who I'm great with politically, but I don't want to hang with them. They don't know how to have fun, so. So it's like that.
In your
Really?
final thoughts?
They don't know how to toggle their shit off, so they want to talk about it all the time. I'm like, oh no, this ain't the time that I'm gonna be parsing this word.
So what is something you're excited about looking at the next
30 years. I'm excited about my grandchild and my grandchildren, great-grandchildren. My grandson, who I can't stop talking about, is 28 years old. He's CAD, computer-assisted design, because he's got that left brain thing like me. My son became an engineer, and you can see this left brain thing goes all through the generations. But he's also learning how to play the flute. Oh. And he writes poetry. And we had a long, multi-hour discussion about Democracy in Chains of Nancy McLean's book. And so I get so excited thinking about what this Renaissance child is going to be in 30 years. You know, that's beyond just goo-goo gaga grandma. Yeah. That's about to be so lucky to have a child that has a left brain and a right brain working so seamlessly together. I am worried because nothing captures his interest very long. Okay. Still, that's just grandma griping, right? But he excites me. He excites me a lot. And every time we're only supposed to talk for 5 minutes, it ends up being 2 hours. Nothing's better than that. But his father, my son, died when he was only 20. And so that made us much closer together after that. That's my 30-year plan.
So with that, Ms. Loretta Ross, we want to thank you so much for being
y'all for listening to me.
So generous with your time. And we, of course, want to give you your flowers, not just an applause, but literally. Oh, thank you. Again, we've been very excited to have you here and to have all of you here. We want to thank, again, everyone who has been here for the symposium, whether you arrived for this session or you've been here since we started at 2 o'clock yesterday. Your questions, your generosity, your excitement, and your challenging of each other and our speakers. And really, it's been joy to see this all come together. Loretta, you had asked, how are you feeling about this? And it's just been so exciting to see this all come together after so much work, and it wouldn't have been possible without all of you and the org. So unless my co-lead has something to say, no?
I have nothing to say. We're going to go have fun, as Professor Loretta Ross
Yeah,
said
yeah,
that we
yeah,
should.
we're going to
taking
go
up
have
the
fun.
party hard
So
part
again, we
now.
want to thank you all so much.